This is Comic Shenanigans, episode 1156, Comic Talk Solo.
Ain't no stopping them shenanigans. Love getting into shenanigans. All up in them shenanigans. 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 Shenanigans.
Welcome to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. This is episode 1156. It's a bit of a Comic Talk solo episode today, as I'm just kind of chatting for a little bit for this episode. The original plan for the episode kind of ended up going to the wayside, so I'm just kind of going to talk a little off the cuff today about a few different topics. One I actually want to talk about is that, so recently, I think I've mentioned this on the show previously, but in the past year or so, there was times when my reading pile of current books had gotten quite large. I was really behind on reading. And in March, I think, or maybe it was February, I decided, or maybe actually, maybe it was January, that I'm going to try and keep myself reading 10 comics a day, and this way I'll be able to kind of get through my backlog, which I was able to do. And then I was like, well, how do I keep going? What am I going to read now? So I've been using, a combination of things off my shelf, Marvel Unlimited, DC Infinite, as a way of kind of finding material, either material I've read before in the past. I think for the most part, like I look at, when I write things down, it's usually, books that I have not read recently. So sometimes it is rereading. It's been a lot of fun, to be honest. I'm a little behind as we speak. I think I'm 4 days behind. So, I'm not quite keeping up. So I'm about 40 books behind. But it's interesting when, new comic book day comes out. That'll keep me going for a couple days. And then I'm like, all right, back into the backlog. And I'm about to go on a trip. So as I speak, actually, this episode, I believe, comes out on the 8th of August, if I've made my math correct, while I'm actually on a Disney cruise in Alaska. So while I'm gone, this episode's coming up anyway. So while I'm traveling, I'll be, downloading a lot of comics onto my Marvel Unlimited or DC Infinite, and hopefully reading, when I have a spare moment here and there. I'll probably bring some books, and I have a book by an author named Daniel Dockery that actually I'm going to be interviewing for the show at the end of August. So I want to make sure I get his book read. So there's going to be some actual books, but also in the background, I still want to get those kind of 10 comics a day. It's kind of like the 10 reps that I'm trying to do every day. And so what has happened as a result is I have found myself going down some interesting and weird corridors, just kind of exploring, certain books that I have not read before or haven't in a long time. When I was in vacation back in April, I decided, let's go back to the X-Men. Actually, sorry, not even X-Men. I'm trying to remember where it started. I think I was like, I'm going to read Cable. And I read Cable up to a certain point, and it was really becoming intertwined with X-Force. I'm like, well, I better go and read X-Force. And then I was reading X-Force. I'm like, what I should do? I should really read some I was reading Cable, and then I was like, I also need some X-Man. So I was reading like X-Man, Cable, and that was like kind of on vacation reading. I was just kind of reading all those books. Recently, I've actually gone back and I've read like Captain America by Mark Waid. I've started Heroes Reborn. Actually, sorry. It's Heroes Return by Mark Waid, but I actually went back to Heroes Reborn because I'm like, well, that's kind of like an easy breezy read. So sometimes I have, I read like 100 issues of Scooby-Doo Team Up. Was it the most heady books? No, but it was a breezy read, and I was trying to kind of meet my quota, and that made it easier on days where I maybe didn't have as much reading time. So I'm kind of breezing through these books. I really enjoyed Scooby-Doo Team Up. I thought that was such an inspired book. It was an easy breezy read, but it went to surprising continuity places. It just had a lot of fun with the characters. It was just a ton of fun. And then recently, that was part of the reason for reading Captain America: Heroes Reborn. The same type of idea of reading silly comics. They were fun, and they definitely took themselves seriously, but at times they were a little silly at the same time. It was interesting reading it again, and I think I actually read Avengers from Heroes Reborn as well, and there's just some stuff I forget about. They were definitely seeding bigger things, and then they didn't really go anywhere in certain areas, and then by the end it was just really confusing. But I actually stayed away from my favorite Heroes Reborn title, which is Iron Man. Although I've recently read so much Iron Man, I also read, I think from forget the name of the title of the epic. I think it was Blood and Metal or Crash and Metal or Crash and Burn or something like that. It was the Iron Man epic that was around issue 300, and I read it, and then I just kept going, and then I had read The Crossing, and which actually the episode that comes out before this is my interview with Terry Cavanaugh talking about The Crossing in particular. And then I got into the Teen Tony stuff, and then I meant to keep going, and then I was like, well, I know that stuff pretty indelibly. I know the Heroes Reborn and Heroes Return stuff very well, and I was kind of like, well, I should probably read something else. In fact, initially, because I was reading that one using the physical trades, I actually went back to the earliest Iron Man epic that I have, which is, I believe, The Enemy Within. So I started reading that for a little bit before I got, distracted by other things. Like some of those things, I'm just kind of looking at legacy books that I've been reading or have read this year. And it again, it's a weird smorgasbord, and like you could tell where I kind of jumped in and then jumped out. Like Amazing Spider-Man, I read like issues 194 to 213, and then I was just kind of moved on to something else. And again, I read a little bit of Avengers, but it's mainly the Crossing issues. Batman, I read Under the Red Hood again, partly because I wanted to talk about it with Jed Winnick, which we did recently on the show. Captain America, like I mentioned. Cable, I made it 34 issues before I got distracted by other things. I would like to get back to that at some point. I read DC versus Marvel again, 1 to 4. I was reading a whole stretch of Hulk stuff. I read the whole Bruce Jones era. And then I was also reading, I don't know if I'd ever really read from the beginning the Red Hulk stuff by Jeff Loeb and McGinnis, so I kind of started there. I got to about Fall of the Hulks, and then it started getting weird and complicated and harder to keep track of, and that's actually something I'm going to talk about today. So I kind of moved on from that. When I did the Bruce Jones stuff, after I read it, then I was like, well, wait a minute, I should probably go back to the beginning of that run. So I made it to like issue 26. So I read it to issue 26 and also from 34 to 91. So I still have like 8 issues in the middle that I need to read. And then I have never really read a lot of the Peter David Hulk. So I started kind of reading the beginning of that, just kind of sprinkling that in with some of my reading. What else have I kind of focused on a little bit? This year I'd read a bunch of Moon Knight. I read the 99 and the 4 issues there and the 13 issues of the 2006 series. But that was, well, at least for the first one, was definitely because I had been, I was going to have that conversation with Glenn Greenberg talking about editing those books. So that's part of what kind of brought that up for me. For no reason particularly, I started reading a bunch of Punisher issues kind of going backwards. So I read, the 4 issues of the 2023 series. I read the 2022 series. I read the 2018 series. I read the Punisher Kill Crew. I was just kind of going backwards. I recently had Pat Olive on the show, so I read Rough Riders, like all, 17 issues amongst 3 different miniseries. As I said, I read 100 issues of Scooby-Doo Team Up. I read, what else did I read? I read a bunch of Superman issues here and there, a bunch of Uncanny X-Men here and there, mainly the crossover stuff as I was reading X-Force and Cable, a bunch of War Machine, but that was mainly, again, crossovers that were in other places as well. I read 1 issue of the Weapon X AOA book. I don't know why I only read the 1. It's interesting. 2 is the one I could probably off the top of my head name most of the stuff, like the main beats from that, because that was a big issue when I was young, and so it was really, again, indelibly inked on my subconscious. And then a bunch of What If issues. Wolverine, that's another one. I read issues 76 to 118. So a nice big stretch. And then it's interesting because I don't remember much of Wolverine from that period. But then it starts to get into stuff I know really well. Like once it hits 101 I actually own that issue. Is the first and probably one of the only Wolverine issues I had bought. I think eventually I bought 125, 126, 127, something like there. As I said, X-Force, I went from 1 to 32, X-Men 1 to 18. And those were fun. And I also started reading the X-Force in 2008, the first kind of Kill Squad X-Force. I read the first issues of that. So that's just some of the stuff I've kind of been reading this year and trying to, read things from all sorts of different eras. Really enjoying, as I said, The Heroes Return, Captain America. It is interesting because I didn't remember that well a lot of the Dan Jurgens stuff. I don't think it's quite as nuanced as the Mark Waid stuff. Definitely has a different flair to it. But I'm still enjoying it overall. It is still, a very decent book. It is interesting reading those types of books because that right around the corner is, huge sea changes coming for that character. Like 9/11 changes Captain America because you have I forget what the name of I want to say Reiber was the writer, but definitely John Cassaday was the artist. And you have a completely different feeling for Captain America after 9/11. And then when you move a few years later after Avengers Disassembled, then you have the Brubaker era, which is completely different. And it is phenomenal. It's transformative. It's probably my favorite version of Captain America. That comic is just a thrill ride from beginning to end. There's moments, obviously, that are more of a lull or maybe aren't as quite as enjoyable as earlier, but for the most part, like, it is just impeccably done and very exciting. So that might be another thing I start to reread soon. As you can notice, mainly I'm a Marvel rereader. Actually, one of the things I wanted to talk about and just kind of get into is that, by doing all this, I've had a lot of more experience with the Marvel and DC apps, and they're both extremely frustrating, but in different ways. I think the biggest one that really bugs me from the Marvel side is, you find a comic you want to read. In my case, like I'm going to download because I'm often going on a subway or some such, so I want to be able to read these things if I don't have a signal. So I go to download. And you could download, but the process of downloading comics is really not the most fun. It's difficult to kind of, you have to kind of click on it and you have to wait for it to kind of load information and say download issue. Like, there should be a way, especially if you're looking at a title. And like if I'm looking at Amazing Spider-Man and it pulls up Amazing Spider-Man for me and it lists all the issues, which is fantastic. If I want to, download 30 issues of Amazing Spider-Man, it's incredibly tedious. Now, maybe I'm missing something easy, but I don't think I am. It's incredibly tedious to kind of go through and download the issues you want, because you have to kind of on each one, click the three little dots, and there's no kind of mass download, which is really frustrating. And that would make it such a more seamless experience from a reader's perspective. And then I think the worst, and the thing that really drives me mental, is then trying to delete the downloads that you have. It takes forever. It is not a fun experience. It is very laborious. And again, I download big swaths of stuff because I want to read, big chunky runs. And so then the process of doing that is just very much not a fun experience. And so it almost makes me not want to do it sometimes. It makes me not want to, go through the process of downloading them. That being said, when you download them, I do like that there are certain different ways to kind of list all the different downloads you have. So you can download it kind of A to Z, which is probably in some ways the easiest. What I've actually really enjoyed is sorting it by publication date, which is an interesting way to go. But again, if you've downloaded a crap ton of books and maybe like from a different era, being able to kind of have it all automatically sorted by original publication date is actually a pretty easy and nice way to look at it. So like I've downloaded a crap ton of stuff, and when I go to Cable and X-Force, being able to see publication date actually makes it really easy. And really nice to kind of see it all kind of laid out in a very, easy to digest kind of way. I found with DC Universe Infinite, at times they have some really great ideas. Like they have, for example, the Superman Triangle era. It's all kind of sorted into an era. Like it's easy to kind of find and search for things. Like they'll have things ranked by storylines, and sometimes that's it's really well put together. I have found that often Marvel will have kind of reading guides, but they're not the most comprehensive, and they're not always that many storylines, and some of the weirder ones you're probably not going to see. Whereas I would say that they really get into the weeds on the DC side in terms of all the different storylines that you can kind of look through and find. It's almost too much at times, but I love that they have made an attempt to do that, so that there's a lot of different things that you may just want to read that storyline, and you can do that. And some of them are easy, like the Flash Terminal Velocity is obviously just going to have a bunch of Flash issues. That's not difficult, but there's some which are obviously going to encompass multiple different books, so it's nice to be able to kind of have everything in an easy spot. For example, like even the Superman the Warworld saga, they have the Prelude, they have Warworld Rising. Now again, for the most part, it's just certain books. Like Action Comics was mainly where most of it happened, but then they have like interludes, Superman and the Authority, and then you go into like the Arena and more Action Comics, War World Revolution. And to be honest, I forgot how long it went on for. But I just really like I think the way that they've designed how to get into storylines and how to really experience things to be at times more enjoyable and more comprehensive on the Marvel side. In terms of downloads, it's a hot mess because you could download a bunch of stuff and then it's kind of just putting it in the order you downloaded it for the most part, but depending on how long it took to download certain issues, it ends up being all over the place. Like, it's not sortable, from at least from what I can see. So I end up with, like, for example, I wanted to download a bunch of Justice League Generation Lost because it was a book I forgot about and forgot that Judd Winnick did, and I love having Judd on the show and would love to chat about with him at some point. So downloaded that. The issues all over the place. I downloaded a bunch of Justice League of America by Marty Pasco and Jerry Conway, and I thought that would be kind of fun, but it's all over the place. And so, like, when I look at it, I don't even know where to start because I've had this big, sheet of all these comics, and I feel like I have to kind of go through it and look at, okay, like, where's issue number 1 of Generation Lost? Like, do I even have it on here? Maybe it didn't download. Like, I wouldn't know. And there's like 20-something issues, and that's not a pleasurable reading experience. So I just found that in terms of a user interface, there could be a lot better here. Another element that Marvel doesn't really do is they don't have it kind of collected by like an omnibus. Like, they don't have an omnibus version of that. Now, they do that in DC. However, like, I'm not someone who has the ultra tier, and that's a whole other issue. So I have the regular, so all the kind of quote unquote collections, which are really just, stuff that's already publicly available on the regular paid subscription, but put into a slightly different, reading format or all collected together instead of you having to kind of find it on your own, only available if you have the more expensive version. And I don't really get that, and I do not love that because I wish that was a little bit easier. And that's another thing. Like, I found that the price in the DC ones, and so I'm in Canada, so I can only speak to what I can see, and I don't know how much it costs in the States. But like, when I go to buy, a monthly membership is $9.99. If you get a DC Universe membership, it's $60 a month. Sorry, a year, I should say. And if you get the Ultra, it's $145. So the Ultra is great. It has a lot of stuff. The problem is it worth $85 more than what I'm currently paying? And I would argue probably not. Getting the books a little bit earlier is a nice perk, but I don't think it's worth that much money. If it had been $10 more, I would have been like, yeah, that's fine. Even maybe $20, but like, once it hit like more than double what I'm paying $60 US, and instead it's like $140. Actually, I don't know if this is US actually, but I'm paying $60 in some currency, and for $145, so more than double, I can get stuff a little bit faster and get, lazy collections put together instead of having to do it all myself. Like, that is not worth the extra money, unfortunately. Almost wish that it was, just so I wouldn't have to pay so much, so it's really unfortunate. The Marvel one, I don't even know what I pay for that anymore, but that always seems like a good deal too. And to be honest, like, I do a lot more Marvel reading, so it's a lot easier for me to justify the cost. There's elements between the two. I kind of wish I could take the best of both worlds and just have that version of the UI, because there's just some stuff that is so frustrating about both, and just hard to see. I do think Marvel does a better job of being able to search by creators, but that's not perfect either. And nothing is. Part of me wonders how much kind of money and management is going into kind of curating and cultivating these particular, experiences. I would say DC at times feels like it has more of its stuff, but then you'll come across big swaths of like Superman, and not even like old school Superman. We're talking about like, kind of Silver Age forward, that you'd kind of expect that it would have been dumped on there at some point, and they're just not there. The biggest glaring errors, I think, that for many years were on the on the Marvel side, is that you had Spectacular Spider-Man. Like, it's a great book, it's a great B title for Spider-Man, and just not a lot of it has ever been collected. Now that has recently started to change. We finally got all of J.M. DeMatteis' artwork, his stories on there. But there's still only 207 issues of Spectacular Spider-Man that are listed there. And that's a little low. I mean, there's 263, I think. 263 issues. And so if we only have, just over 200, that's still a big swath that we're just missing. There's 56 issues that are missing, and so that can be a little frustrating and unfortunate. And I think definitely like the Web of Spider-Man is kind of in the same boat in terms of not having as much coverage through online. So it's a great way to be able to enjoy, these legacy comics, but then they're just not there. And I don't know, there's something about the fact that it's Spider-Man, the mascot of the company. It's weird when, again, I think it's about 31 issues missing of Web of Spider-Man. Like, that's just seems a little odd. Again, it's better than it was. We're definitely starting to get more of it reprinted. Now, mainly that's because we're seeing some restorations. We're seeing some hardcovers or omnibuses. So there's other stuff that's kind of coming up, and that's part of why we're finally getting these holes filled. But it is an odd thing. And some of the stuff I'm never going to be able, I won't say never. At the moment, I'm unable to read all of X-Men. But, that's not what I expect to be there. So I'm not that upset about it, because that's a relatively niche or fringe character that I really liked and was a big fan of back in the day. But the fact that there's only 46 issues out of, I think it ran 75 or so, is not necessarily a big shock to me. Do I wish there was more? For sure. But is it a shock? No. But so it's been interesting experiencing both apps and kind of seeing what they have to offer. I do feel like when I'm just kind of looking for something random, I feel like I am more likely to look into Marvel. I don't know why. I don't know why that's true. There's a lot of great DC stuff that I've not read over the years. But for whatever reason, when I'm kind of quickly looking at something to pick up and enjoy and read, I'm probably not randomly picking up a DC book. I don't know why. If I was going to pick up a DC book right now and just start plowing through issues, it would probably be something Legion oriented. Not because I have any particular love of the Legion, but more because I kind of want to. I remember absolutely loving Mark Waid and Barry Kidson's run on Legion. Unfortunately, it didn't last as long as we would have liked, and then it became something else when they brought in Supergirl, and I believe it was Tony Bedard. So it's been interesting to kind of see that play out. So I guess if I had to go do anything, it would be Legion. And I think my history on that is when I was in university and my adjoining roommate, he had his own room, but we had one adjoining door to each other. So we could kind of open it and hang out or just keep it shut and never see each other. We did see each other. His name was Ben Riley, of course, because of course it would be. Of course I'd be friends with someone named Ben Riley. That just tracks. He was more of a bit of a Legion guy. And so I learned a bunch of continuity things about Legion. It's interesting. It was the early 2000s. It was the very early days of torrents, and illegally downloading comics, which I have always contended is kind of a weird, fraught thing, especially in the time. Because if I'm downloading and at the time they were not like high-res scans, but this is like collections that people had. But if I'm downloading, someone's scanned copies of The Flash with, oh my God, what's his name? Wally West as the main character. And at that time, I think Flash would have been around issue 170, 180. It was, I think, maybe in the early part of the Jeff Johns run. So if I download the first 100 issues of that, at the time, there was no way to get that material. Except for maybe the return of Barry Allen, which, to be honest, I have it in trade. So, it's not like I haven't given them my money for that. But at the time, there was no mechanism. There was no mechanism to get these comics. If you wanted these comics, you either had to find the comics and buy them off a reseller or a storefront, which still is not the money going to the company who has the material, or it was downloading them because they didn't give you a method of actually paying for them initially. So I felt that was always kind of an interesting one at the time. It felt different as someone who's downloading these things because I was like, well, I literally can't buy these things. They don't make them available, and I would pay for them if I could. And I think that is a slippery slope for a lot of people. And I think a lot of people download newer comics and they're not paying for them. But if you wait a few months and then you read it on Marvel Unlimited or DC Infinite, you've paid for a subscription. So you're kind of covered. If you just kind of wait a few months, you don't need to, illegally download because it's relatively inexpensive. It pays for itself, depending on how many comics you read. And I'm reading metric tons now, so even more so. But yeah, there's just kind of less of a need for it. But then there's weird random things that you just can't get or will never be there for other rights reasons. A big one that like is weird where it starts to show up, but it's not fully there yet, is any of the cross-gen material. I love cross-gen. That is a hill I will die on. I was a huge fan of all the cross-gen books back in the day. I was right there from the beginning. I remember being at my comic shop and seeing the initial, one-shot that kind of led into everything, and it birthed 4 different titles at the moment. That's right at that time. The first 2 years worth, I think I covered everything. I had a lot of the cross-gen material. Eventually, I just didn't have the money. I was like in my early 20s. I was a student, so I had to kind of make some hard choices. And some of the books I was like, well, it's been a good 2 years, and I think that's, they've given me a good place to end on. So I guess that's it. But that's one where, you can't read this stuff digitally for the most part. You can definitely get a little bit of it. They've reprinted some of it in omnibus format. And so now because it's an omnibus, now we get to see, some of these characters on, like, for example, the Marvel Unlimited app. But there's a lot of stuff that's just not there, which is a real shame because I would totally read it again and again. Like a big one is Ruse. I was a huge fan of Ruse. But the only thing that's on there is the 4 issues of the revival that was in 2011 that never really ended up going anywhere after that. Although, it still had a great pedigree in terms of the team involved, which was great because it was still by Mark Waid, although it had different artists. It was, I think, Marco Federici, which is not quite the same. Speaking of Ruse, I actually just bought some original art from the Ruse comic, and that was such a joy to be able to get. I did not expect to get it, and I did get it, and it was awesome. It was very exciting to be able to get that, and it was just something I did not expect, and it was very cool. So I finally have a cross-gen page in my collection, which is very exciting. So anyways, I have prattled on long enough. This has been almost half an hour. This has been fun to talk about, kind of what I've been reading, how do I feel about the Marvel Unlimited app and the DC Infinite app, again, how I feel about kind of early downloading in the early 2000s compared to now, and the fact that now we have these services that, for the most part, let us get glimpses into so much Marvel and DC history. And I guess that's the thing, too, is that, like, I don't know enough about their other avenues legally to read, for example, image books, etc. But I've never really dabbled too much in them. I do miss the old Comixology days. I used to buy so much, I guess technically licenses the digital content back in the day because I guess I wasn't really getting, Marvel Unlimited, but I liked the idea of I just kind of had more of a library that wasn't dependent on whatever version of the digital format they had at that time in terms of the subscription. It's interesting to see how all these things evolve. But anyways, thanks for listening to this episode. You can always email me at comicshenanigans@gmail.com, rate the show on Apple Podcasts, listen to us on Apple Podcasts, and also listen to us on Spotify. The next episode will be the 20th appearance of Ron Friends, as he comes on board to talk about his newest story in Savage Sword of Conan that came out last month. Earlier this month. I already forget where we are. It came out in July. I'm recording in July, so I'm speaking about something in July. So that'll be really great. As I mentioned, we have an author coming on at the end of August to talk about his book. I'm not sure what we're going to be doing for Book of the Month Club next month, as we've kind of missed, I think, 1 or 2 now. So hopefully we'll get back on the wagon, and that'll be really exciting. So thanks again for listening. We will catch you next time. Bye-bye.